Thank you very much, Hilary, for the very kind invitation to speak. I'm delighted to see everyone here, and I hope you enjoy my paper. All arts constantly aspire towards the condition of musicology, Victorian musicology as interdiscipline. Anyone working in academia today will have heard and probably will have used the term interdisciplinarity. In Victorian studies, it is as endemic as it is intractable. A few examples. The Journal of Victorian Studies proclaims that it is, quote, one of the first interdisciplinary journals in the humanities and remains the flagship journal in the field, publishing essays on topics from literature, social and political history, fine arts, science, philosophy, economics, and law. There is the self-explanatory Victorian Review, an interdisciplinary journal of Victorian studies. Interdisciplinary 19th century studies and their journal, 19th century contexts, an interdisciplinary journal. The Midlands Interdisciplinary Victorian Studies Seminar, and the Victorian Interdisciplinary Studies Association of the Western United States. And there are societal blurbs as well, including the North American Victorian Studies Association, which claims that it is encouraging a wide variety of theoretical and disciplinary approaches to the field. The British Association for Victorian Studies, a multidisciplinary organization, including art history, cultural studies, history, literature, performance studies, and the history of science. The 19th Century Studies Association, an interdisciplinary association interested in exploring all aspects of the long 19th century, from science to music, architecture to religion, movement to literatures, and beyond. And my own favorite, the Center for 19th Century Studies at Durham University, advancing interdisciplinary research. Everyone in Victorian studies knows something about interdisciplinarity, but endemic interdisciplinarity does not make practice easy. Matthew Rowlandson claims, quote, that successful interdisciplinary research estranges the disciplines from their objects. Disciplines, he suggests, are therefore themselves constituted by a critical tension between method and object. The virtue of interdisciplinary Victorian studies at the moment is to put that tension in evidence. I would like to put that tension in evidence by advancing an entirely different approach to the intractable problem of interdisciplinarity. I would like to argue that interdisciplinarity does far more than estrange disciplines from their objects. It forges new disciplines in its interdisciplinary image. Interdisciplinarity creates what we now call an interdiscipline. I would call Victorian musicology an interdiscipline, and in this lecture I want to prove my assertion by tracing the origins of interdisciplinarity to Walter Pater's famous adage, all arts constantly aspire towards the condition of music. Let's begin with a very brief introduction to the history and concept of an interdiscipline. Although not a Victorian term, the word interdiscipline has existed since 1930, when it was used in the 18th annual report of the American Social Science Research Council, quote, concern with cooperative research or interdiscipline problems should not be allowed to hamper the first-rate mind, alert to the possibilities inherent in whatever problems enlists its energies. Subsequent usage continues to reflect this definition, not least in periodical titles ranging across a wide array of topics. Good definitions of interdiscipline are elusive, however. Wikipedia and the OED give the impression that definitions stem largely from interrelated sciences like biosemantics, forensic kinesiology, genetic toxicology, humor and translation, information science, public health, social science and agriculture, and sociolinguistics. According to J. Stikos, demography, for example, is clearly a discipline because as a field, it contains its own body of interrelated concepts, techniques, journals, and professional associations. But by the nature of its subject matter and methods, demography is just as clearly an interdiscipline, drawing heavily on biology and sociology for the study of fertility, on economics and geography for studies of migration, and on the health sciences for the studies of mortality. Historically, definitions have tended to reflect a hard scientific or social scientific origin, even if they are widely applicable across the arts as well. Human communications theorist S.W. Littlejohn defines an interdiscipline as a field of scholars who identify with various disciplines but share a common interest in a theme that crosses traditional boundaries. Echoing Littlejohn, humanities computing expert Willard McCarty claims that a true interdiscipline is not easily understood, funded, or managed in a world already divided along disciplinary lines, despite standard pieties. Properly so called, an interdiscipline is not just another administrative entity with its budget, chair, and department members, difficult as this is to carve out these days out of existing turf. It isn't an institutionally sanctioned kind of poaching. Rather, it is an entity that exists in the interstices of the existing fields, dealing with some, many, or all of them. An interdiscipline, he goes on to say, is constituted precisely by that unifying perspective on what happens at the intersection of two or more fields. This perspective gives the interdiscipline integrity and the basis for its own research agenda, curriculum, and publications. Nevertheless, as long as it remains an interdiscipline, it depends on continuous activity in the intersecting fields. Preoccupation with what they share puts it in position to foster cross-fertilizing exchange among them, and as a merchant trader among mutually incomprehending cultures. Thus it serves not them as a servant, his master, but collegially, which has radical implications for its institutionalization. More recent theorists struggle to develop these definitions, emphasizing the fundamentally binaristic nature of disciplinary and interdisciplinary projects rather than the collective unity of an interdiscipline. Theorists today tend to focus on the constantly changing dynamics of disciplinary configuration, admitting that they produce inevitably fuzzy interdisciplinary boundaries. For today's ethnomusicologists, for example, long used to working across musicology and anthropology, an interdiscipline is porous. According to Gabrielle Solis, it is a discipline itself that has its roots in two other disciplines, two older disciplines, rather than an interdisciplinary field. Let's talk about Walter Pater now. I wonder if this definition of Solis's would be recognized by Walter Pater. Pater is not generally interpreted in interdisciplinary contexts, to my knowledge. He does not appear in the Oxford Handbook of Interdisciplinarity, for example, but his work provides a rare opportunity to theorize musicological and other interdisciplinarity from a contemporary Victorian standpoint. Pater's reference to music is famous as much for its clarity as its opaqueness, and he writes, "All arts constantly aspire toward the condition of music. For while in all other kinds of art, it is possible to distinguish the matter from the form, and the understanding can always make this distinction, yet it is the constant effort of art to obliterate it. That the mere matter of a poem, for instance, its subject, namely, its given incidence or situation, that the mere matter of a picture, the actual circumstance of an event, the actual topography of a landscape, should be nothing without the form, the spirit of the handling, that this form, this mode of handling should become an end in itself, should penetrate every part of the matter. This is what all art strives after and achieves in different degrees." The enigmatic meaning behind Pater's assertion has eluded scholars for years. More recently, musicologist Mark Evan Bonds has tried explaining it as an exemplar of what is called in musicology absolute music. Absolute music is music with what I would call flat-packed form, if I can put it that way. In other words, music with a predetermined form, like the symphony or the string quartet. Music which effectively collapses form and content. Pater hoped, Bond suggests, to apply to art the same kind of inseparability of form and content possible only in music. It is the art of music, Pater avers, which most completely realizes this artistic ideal, this perfect identification of matter and form, in its consummate moments. The end is not distinct from the means, the subject from the expression. They inhere in and completely saturate each other, and to it, therefore, to the condition of its perfect moments, all the arts may be supposed constantly to aspire. Two interrelated concepts emerge from Pater's dalliance with music, ekphrasis and Understreben, and I would now like to treat each one separately, starting with ekphrasis. Music philosopher Lydia Gerd defines ekphrasis as producing images for the mind's eye by means of words. Pater comes in a long line of ekphrastic communicators and uses the technique to describe Titian's, once thought to be Giorgione's, concert, figured here. He praises the skill with which the painter caught the waves of wandering sound and fixed them forever on the lips and hands of the performers. Ekphrasis plays an important role in the way Victorian musicology imagines music. Victorian polymath Herbert Spencer is unusually ekphrastic when describing music in his seminal evolutionary treatise, The Origin and Function of Music, from 1857. The O of astonishment or delight exemplifies, he suggests, the middle voice. Beware, the lower voice. Hello, how came you here? Contrasting registers. Calling for the maid, Mary, an ascending interval of a third. The list is extensive. Fuller sentences in his treatise extend his ekphrastic approach and replicate the emotional tempo in the use of expressive Italian terminology. He writes, the slowest movements, largo and adagio, are used where such depressing emotions as grief or such unexciting emotions as reverence are to be portrayed, while the more rapid movements, andante, allegro, presto, represent successively increasing degrees of mental vivacity. Charles Darwin is similar, if more elegant, when writing about musical origins, as he conjures up the intangible sensations of musical experience in the words he uses to describe them. And he says, the sensations and ideas excited in us by music, or by the cadences of impassioned oratory, appear from their vagueness, yet depth, like mental reversions to the emotions and thoughts of a long past age. While Darwin's ekphrastic imagination is well known, and Spencer's has probably never attracted attention, neither has the influence of the ekphrastic imagination ever been placed in Victorian musicological contexts, even though examples of it are ubiquitous. It was 1896, for example, before Victorian ornithological books included illustrations, musical illustrations transcribed into musical notation. Before then, field guides used mnemonics in lieu. But mnemonic books like A Dictionary of Bird Notes from 1889 take ekphrastic techniques to an altogether higher zoomusicological level, producing a veritable notebook, bird note dictionary, crammed not simply with mnemonics, but ekphrastic glosses on onomatopoeic syllables. Thus, the great black-backed gull produces a croak, which is described as harsh. The ringdove, coo, 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 which is described as soft. Earlier still, the same ekphrastic imagination occurs in pedagogical writing, which for educational purposes tries to replicate the actual sound of musical objects. The butterfly in Henry Keatley Moore's emphatically Froebelian Child's Pianoforte book from 1880 makes this explicit in the text he uses to introduce the image preceding the song of the butterfly, which you can see here. Now you know, he suggests, the butterfly flutters its wings as it hovers over the flowers, and how frequently it rests, the wings quite still. Let us try to express both the fluttering and the resting in our music. The butterfly not only harmonizes text and image, it also harmonizes image, words, and music, as you can see here, duplicating the butterfly's movement in the melody's upward and fluttering progression. The more distant lower butterfly, that you can see there, is the note G, which is the first note, which nears as it rises up to the note D, which is the second circle, on the third beat of the first bar, where the nearer butterfly alights for honey. Let's talk about Understreben. Unassuming as it is, the ekphrastic butterfly represents a musicological interdiscipline because its constituent disciplinary parts each seek one another, alternatively suggesting disciplinary identities. Walter Pater might explain this by invoking the word Understreben, literally anders streben, others or other seeking. He says what German critics term as Understreben, a partial alienation from its own limitations, through which the arts are able not indeed to supply the place of each other, but reciprocally lend each other new forces. Thus again, sculpture aspires out of the hard limitation of pure form toward color, or its equivalent. Poetry also, in many ways, finding guidance from the other arts, the analogy between a Greek tragedy and a work of Greek sculpture, between a sonnet and a relief, of French poetry generally with the art of engraving, being more than mere figures of speech, and all the arts in common aspiring towards the principle of music, music being the typical or ideally consummate art, the object of the great Understreben of all art, of all that is artistic or partakes of artistic qualities. Partly, Victorian musicology's other seeking is due to the fact that in tandem with developments in university education, particularly in the science of acoustics, musicology was also informed by years of professionally regulated teaching in conservatoires. By the time Britain's professional musicological organization, the Musical Association, was founded in 1874, Britain's first conservatoire, the home of practice, the Royal Academy of Music, was already over 50 years old. The intersection of a professional organization's theoretical interests and a conservatoire's more practical interests is obviated in Spottiswood's proclamation that the society should include, quote, persons interested in both the theory and practice of music, the foremost musicians, theoretical as well as practical. The convergence of theory and practice inscribed Victorian musicology with an interdisciplinary motivation. An exemplar is C. Hubert H. Parry, composer and musicologist, and ardent Spencerian. In his book, Style and Musical Art, Parry cloaks the symphony in theories of scientific evolutionism. Science is not the only discipline to intersect the musical other-seeking, or Understreben. Like Keatley Moore's butterfly, Victorian hymns, for example, often embody in music the same characteristics they represent in theology. In the language of today's interdiscipline of music theology, hymns interrogate and problematize their disciplinary episteme. The famous hymn, Abide With Me, is indicative. Here you can see a series of falling and rhythmically lengthening melodic motives, programmatically encapsulating the transient nature of life, the lengthening of life into an eschatological future, and the eternal immutability of God the Creator. Music can also inform theology, conversely, especially theology reflecting scientific concepts of intelligent design. The correlation of music are so many and so perfect, John Harrington Edward opines, that of themselves they prove a supreme creative mind. Victorians would have recognized this kind of Understreben, using music to express theology and theology to express science. And so to conclude, Victorian examples are not altogether different from current ones. Disciplines seek other disciplines to answer questions about themselves. But is Understreben and its philosophical friend ekphrasis a general feature of all interdisciplines, or was Victorian musicology unique? Do all the arts aspire to the condition of musicology? Because the object musicology studies, music, is the perfect exemplar of disciplinary other-seeking. Helen Small proffers an admittedly incomplete answer. Not all disciplines interdisciplinarize similarly. That's a hard word to say. Unlike the sciences, the humanities, she says, study the meaning-making practices of human culture, past and present, focusing on interpretation and critical evaluation, primarily in terms of the individual response with an ineliminable element of subjectivity. For Small, what might make music special makes all the arts special, subjectivity. But is musical subjectivity different? Certainly, Walter Pater thinks so, I believe, if the school of Giorgione is anything to go by. Sheila Jasanoff alters an alternative view. There are actually two types of interdiscipline, one which comes into being principally through exchanges amongst scholars already belonging to one another or an established disciplinary community and trained in its forms or reasoning and researches and practices, and another which becomes, she claims, an interdependent disciplinary formation situated among the disciplines. She says such a field may come into being through topical exploration and theoretical or methodological innovation, as well as through exchange and coalescing into an autonomous island of knowledge-making with its own native habits of production and trading. But again, where does this place musicology as an interdiscipline? Is it old or new, Victorian or modern? I would offer a third and final opinion. Because they are limited by their own subjectivity, all arts naturally aspire to the fuller condition of interdisciplinarity. And so, like music itself, the arts aspire to a condition beyond themselves. All arts aspire to the condition of musicology because of all the arts, only musicology studies a self-transcending object. Music is a form of plenitude, to use Peter's terminology, and ekphrasis and Understreben are his critical interdisciplinary tools. Perhaps this takes the idea of an interdiscipline too far. Maybe an interdiscipline is merely a convenience for something we do not fully understand and never will, because it exceeds our imagination's ability to grasp its own plenitude. Thankfully, we can at least observe it in the microcosm of Victorian musicology and the macrocosm of Victorian disciplinary culture more widely. Perhaps that's where we should concentrate future research, on identifying interdisciplines rather than interdisciplinarity. Perhaps then we'll have a better sense for our academic origins and the true nature of disciplinary evolution today. Thank you.